Yesterday we looked at how our visual sense, if we would, how it, like I set a little bit the context for the question of what if we could see different lights, if we could see different light spectrum. Yesterday I talked a little bit more about the setting of the context and looking at, well, how are the different light spectrums, why they might not have developed in life forms, what uses they currently have for what costs they would have. So I looked more so a little bit into my perspective and my opinion about why we don't see other lights and why we see the light that we do. And so today I want to go into just fictional speculation on how would our world, how would humanity be different if we actually would see different light spectrums. So let's start with going down. Let's start with looking at the infrared spectrum. How would things be different if we had a very detailed visual sense to see infrared light? In the same way how we see visual light, let's imagine a world where we were able to see infrared light. In general, I don't think that seeing infrared light would actually that important or would be that great of kind of feature for a living being. Because I think in a world, if our biosphere, if our animals, if the living beings on this world would have more prevalent of an infrared sense, and we wouldn't just be like the first species who has developed this, but it's more, and I don't think that in that way would necessarily happen. I mean, maybe potentially you could see that, well, humans would be the first, but it's also kind of weird to probably think about this. I think if we would look at more in a realistic way, it would be a little bit broader in the animal sphere, which would also mean you wouldn't just see infrared, but it would also mean animals would adapt to that is now a sense they potentially have to hide of. Because what would be the advantage of seeing infrared light? The advantage for pretty much all animals would be that you could either see predators who would try to hunt you, or that you could see your prey that you want to hunt a little bit better. Because with infrared light, you would see warm creatures behind a cold background or cold creatures behind a warm background. And in such an environment, I would assume that with the interactions of predators and the prey, that if one either the predator or prey has it over the other one would adapt to hide again just from it. So if it would just be a little bit wider spread, it wouldn't have to be completely spread through our biosphere and with our animals. But if it's just common enough, then you would see probably quite a big adoption on the defense side. And that would mean animals would either be more cold-blooded or warm-blooded animals would actually regulate their temperature not just up but also down to tarn them and hide them in the infrared spectrum to not be seen when they don't want to. So in that sense, I don't think, I mean that this could happen, but I don't think that that big changes very much would happen if you could see infrared more so from the just animal side and from an evolution spectrum. I don't think that the difference to how our visual sense now would make a lot of difference, to be honest. Because I think the defense would be strong enough so that the use of having that sense on its own is not that big. If we look just at humans, how would it change if we were able to see infrared light? Let's just imagine the world is pretty much how it is. Just humanity would be able to see infrared light. So we would be able to see in the heat around us. We would be able to see heat sources. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how it would change us in our perception, how we perceive, how we look at the world. We were able to see heat, like how we kind of imagine it from like infrared cameras, how we have them today. I will take that picture and that kind of image of how our perception would work, kind of, and assume, well, humans could just see that at this point on top of what we normally do, and just have this as an addition. Well, the difference of heat and cold is something that we will perceive not just in how we feel it, but in how we see it. Which of course would change cultural things. Like when we go back to how we would architect things first, it would give us, of course, as all senses, if we could just have more information about the world, that can change how we are able to think about it, how we are able to learn about it, like from the scientific view, just on like our curiosity side of how we can understand the world. That would expand our horizons. All senses would do this. And like how we understand, because we could see how warmth and temperature is like flowing around us. We could see how it changes, so we would put a lot more effort in isolation, because well, we could see it. We could like literally see the isolation of our buildings. So we would have a lot more knowledge early on, would have a lot bigger focus on that. We also, of course, would have like a cultural, when we look at buildings in our architecture, we would probably use it not just functionally, but at some point we would use, of course, seeing temperature. We would use it like artistically, like in our everyday architecture, but also for like art, which would be very fascinating to see, like how would you use like temperature gradients in materials or in like your buildings to like for like kind of colorization, like to just make something that looks beautiful and is like pleasant for us, like how we do it with everything else too. This would be just another aspect of that as well. So we would design our buildings, our clothes to look in a certain way and to like then have a certain experience with seeing temperature. Would it change big things? I'm not sure. I mean, on the medical side, you could have a healthier population because you could just see if the body temperature of another person is higher than it should be. You would just be aware of this because you would just see it in the same way how would see that someone is, I don't know, doesn't shower a lot or just has not very nice hair like I potentially have a little bit more lately. Stuff like that, how we see that someone just doesn't take care of themselves as well. You could just see this from a little bit more of a health perspective of like their body temperature. That would lead to potentially we would be a little bit better or like more able to handle this, and also like when it comes to like handling of like a pandemic and stuff like that, like viruses and like waves of them, because we would just see, okay, like they have a high temperature, but they might have some kind of infection or might want to keep a distance of them. Such an aspect could be a lot more prevalent and a lot more common in our society if we could see the temperature, if we could just see, well, the person over there has a higher temperature than he probably should have. That means something in the body is not all right. There's something going wrong. Either can I help them or do I have to avoid them maybe to like not get that myself? Would just be a lot more common and maybe even a lot early on in our species, which changes. Could make us a little bit more healthy. I don't know in what negative sides you could have different, how that sense could affect our cultures and our social structures in a negative way. Yeah, those are like kind of my thoughts. I will leave it at this, and let's go to the other side. Let's look at how it would look if we could see X-rays and like gamma rays and stuff like this. If we could see them, which first we would have to assume if we could see them. Again, there's not a lot of them very much around. We have like some background noise, but I'm not sure how much they actually would allow us to see more if we had a strong sense of like X-ray and like potentially gamma rays. But even just if we just imagine we could have seen X-rays again, there's not a lot of natural X-rays around us, like at least not in a very high sense. So it would be very dark from this lightning spectrum. So for this fourth experiment, we of course would have to assume X-rays would just be more common on Earth, which would be a huge issue for life because that would destroy our DNA quite a bit and would harden it. So life itself would look very different if we could see that. And if we would have the source of X-rays or gamma rays on this planet, that it's useful to see it and that we could use it as like a visual sense how we see visual light. That would just change like how life even can exist on this planet, potentially how it could be. Like human beings would probably not exist if that would be the case. But for this thought experiment, let's just imagine it's just more common and life would be pretty much how we know it. And like this negative impact of, well, it kind of would destroy most of the life on Earth, or it would look very, very different, or more underground or in water, or would be very different, very shielded, very heavy or very small, very short living on the surface. Potentially, I would assume something like that it would cause if we would have just very common, if you have like the same amount of X-ray and gamma rays as we have this visual light, so that we could see in the same way with it. Our planet would be probably a lot more sterile, if not completely, or life would be very different, very small, and again, probably more so underground and in water. So for my thought experiment, I would just assume fantasy-wise, it wouldn't really make a lot with us and life would just be as it is, but we could just see it and there are just enough sources from our sun in the same with visual light, and let's just imagine how it would change us if we could just see it that way. I think it's a lot more interesting than infrared because, well, with X-ray you can look through stuff, or like, I mean, with UV light you can look through stuff. It's like different. Oh, something is not opaque as we like transparency as we think of is a very weird way of thinking. Because there are a lot of things that are transparent for a lot of light sources and that are opaque for others. Like, to my knowledge, windows are transparent for visual light. But it should be opaque to UV light. I might be wrong. I might be have a mismatch of my memory here, or I might remember something wrong. But even then, like even we look at like radio waves and like our digital internet waves that we use, stuff like that, they go pretty much through our walls. So like walls mostly for us in our rooms and our buildings are opaque as we think about them. For like a lot of light sources that we use for communication, they're just not. Just like our radio waves, our phone waves, our internet waves that we use for like telecommunication and stuff like that, they just pass through walls like they don't exist. They're pretty much like an open window. They just go through. At least mostly they go through. And so like that, what can go through something would change on the material and on the light spectrum very much. And visible light, as we have talked before, is like actually a very, very tiny part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And so being able to see the higher energy parts of them would allow us to see into and perceive the world in a very different way. We all know like X-rays from like medical tests when we have some X-rays, some bones or something like this. So even just in that sense, we could see into other people. I don't know with these like rays from like a sensory side if there's a capacity with like X-ray or gamma rays, if you go a little bit lower, but then like how deep do they pass? Like if you had eyes that can like adjust to like a different like spectrum and like wavelength and like energy set, And we're not just using like the X-ray that we're using like a medical exam, but if we could just continuously with like eyes adjust, like what kind of these rays do we want to look at and perceive it? Is that just a spot where you, how we have it in medical exams, where you just look through something, you could just see the bones and nothing else? Or do you have like steps where you have like a range where if you just get a little bit pass through it, or how that would interact with like our flesh? So could you just look into certain depths? I don't know how these interactions work, so I can't really make speculation accurately on some facts there. But in general, I would just assume you could just look a lot more into things and into people. And like even through objects and through walls and through different things. I haven't done any research for this thought experiment, and I don't want to do any. I just want to have a little bit fun thinking about it. And yeah, what do I want to talk? Maybe we end it here. I mean, time's over. My clock already is. Maybe I should just keep the gamma rays and X-rays for tomorrow. Let's do this, I would say. Or maybe we'll switch the topic again. We'll see, but let's end it here. I hope you have a nice day.